The Metal Gear Solid series has a special place in my heart, seeing as Metal Gear Solid 5 is one of, if not potentially, my favorite games of all time. It's definitely up there, it's a fantastic game, and if you somehow haven't already played it, I know this video is about Metal Gear Solid 2, but that game is a masterpiece and you should absolutely play it. That being said, because I'm a predominantly PC gamer, after finishing Metal Gear Solid 5 and wanting to check out the rest of the series, I came to the rude awakening that that would be easier said than done. At the time, basically the only way to play previous entries was to play it on console or jump through a whole bunch of hoops in order to do emulation. And because of that, I learned a hell of a lot about the Metal Gear world through the internet rather than actually playing the games, which I feel like is a bit of a shame. I wish that the games had been available then so I could have experienced them as they are rather than through an extra lens. That being said, Metal Gear Solid 2, for whatever reason, was basically a blind spot on my radar. I knew the general consensus story for Metal Gear Solid 1, 3, and 4, but for whatever reason, 2 just kind of slipped my mind. Aside from the very obvious bait-and-switch protagonist that has been controversial for years, I didn't know a whole lot about this game. And because of that, and the fact that the Metal Gear Solid Classic Collection is now available on Steam, which means that I can actually play these games, I wanted to give the game a shot, and hence today's game review. And this one's gonna be an odd one, because Metal Gear Solid 2 managed to successfully meet, fail to meet, and surpass my expectations in several different categories. With that being said, I think it's prudent to start from the very beginning. This is just weird. To put it simply, the game simultaneously does a halfway decent job of explaining how to control your character and a horrible job explaining how to control your character at the same time. For those who haven't played Metal Gear Solid 2, basically at the beginning of the game you play as Snake on an oil tanker. This oil tanker basically serves as the first mission in the game, and its existence is basically entirely relegated to the bait and switch we were talking about earlier. Effectively, at the end of the oil tanker mission, which is relatively short, Snake quote-unquote dies, and your protagonist is switched from playing as Snake to playing as Raiden. The thing that's really weird here is that after you complete the tanker mission as Snake, you then go on to play as Raiden, where it explains several systems that it already explained or you would have had to have figured out in order to complete the previous section. Now, my assumption is that they probably did this because when you start up the game, you can choose between starting on the tanker, starting on the plant, or doing both, which is the predominant way that I assume most people are going to play the game. Now, I just don't really understand why they decided to split the game into 3 different sections if the game as a whole in its complete package should go from tanker to plant. So technically, tanker plant should really be the only option. After all, if you skip the tanker and go straight to the plant, you're really not even skipping that much because the tanker section is not very long. And moreover, if you pick to just play the tanker mission, well again, you're barely playing a game at all. Now, as for that tutorial I was talking about, it tells you a few of the things that you need to do, but it goes through it so quickly that there's a good chance you're gonna miss some things. And there are other things just missing from the tutorial that I wish the game had told you, but it just doesn't. And ironically enough, I actually sort of solved my own problem here by doing something unthinkable. I opened up the game manual. Yeah, I had a realization relatively quickly that if I wanted to understand all of the controls of the game, I didn't have to technically look it up on the internet, as the game manual is accessible in the game via the remake, and so I could just look there for the controls. I did so, and it was relatively smooth sailing from there. But I just don't understand why something as simple as grabbing an enemy from behind needs to be so convoluted and not explained. So in order to grab someone, you need to walk up behind them, have nothing in your hands, stop moving completely, and then press the weapon button. If you're even slightly moving or don't let go in time, then you'll flip the person over. If you have a gun, you'll shoot the person. And if you press the attack button, you'll just do an extremely useless and pointless attack combo with punches and kicks. Now, as for controls, this is where I kind of shot myself in the foot. Initially, I planned to play the game as it was intended using a controller, but I quickly ran into a problem that I don't think was relegated to my controller. Might have been a problem with the port, might have been a problem with the settings, I'm not entirely sure. Basically, when I would be moving around with the controller and I wanted to move very slowly, it would be extremely difficult for the game to register a slow-moving input versus a sprinting input. And because of that, on this one section, I kept stepping on things that were loud, getting detected, game overing, and I got frustrated with it. This probably would have really hurt my enjoyment of the game, but fortunately, by some grace of a higher power, the game had gotten an update to the remaster literally the day that I'd purchased it, and that update introduced mouse support for first-person aiming, which was invaluable in this playthrough. So I ended up switching to mouse and keyboard towards the end of the tanker mission. This did cause a lot of problems when it came to platforming sections of the game, as I got killed the vast majority of my deaths by platforming sections. Obviously on mouse and keyboard, easier said than done compared to a controller. But at the end of the day, the PC controls really aren't that bad. The mouse aiming doesn't exactly feel smooth, but I think that if it did, it would probably trivialize the game very quickly, so I'm kind of glad that it isn't. With that though, I think we really ought to move over to the gameplay section. Gameplay in Metal Gear Solid 2 is an interesting note because, well, there's not a whole lot of it. No, seriously, I know that the Metal Gear Solid games have a very heavy reputation for being story-focused games, but this is a bit ridiculous. If I had to make a quick judgment, I would probably assume that roughly over half of my gameplay was spent watching cutscenes or listening to codec calls. I'm not kidding. And here is potentially maybe my only hot take in this video, hopefully anyway, and that's that I fucking hate the codec so much. Seriously, this thing is the worst. I'm sorry, but there's just absolutely nothing interesting about standing there watching two still portraits talk at each other. Like, I understand that the idea was probably to slow down the game and make people listen to the story and make sure they don't get distracted by things that are happening in the game, but after playing modern games, coming back to this one, and having gameplay absolutely grind to a halt, literally standing still doing absolutely nothing so I can listen to people talk at me, it's too much. And it's a shame because I feel like the gameplay of Metal Gear Solid 2 outside of that, you know, when you can actually play the game, is actually pretty fun. Obviously, Metal Gear Solid 2, as with all the other Metal Gear games, aside from, is a stealth game. And like Metal Gear Solid 1 before it, they really want you to do stealth in this game. Getting caught is extremely punishing, and I do feel like this is a bit of a double-edged sword. The reason I say that it's a bit of a double-edged sword is I really appreciated how much emphasis the game put on stealth. After playing Metal Gear Solid 5, where if you get caught you can kind of just go guns blazing and mow down an entire fort by yourself, here, that's not gonna fly. You're behind enemy lines, you're alone, and trying to just blindly fight against all the enemies is not gonna work. You need to evade them and find a place to hide and cool off, or you're just gonna die. But that's where this sort of disconnect with the gameplay starts. So MGS2 gives you a lot of lethal, loud weapons. Things like an M4A1 assault rifle, an AKS-74U assault rifle, a PSG-1 sniper rifle, landmines, C4 explosives, all of these really loud options. So your assumption would be that with all of these, if you had the resources and you did get caught, one of the options might be fighting your way out. To put it bluntly, it isn't, ever. The one main gripe that I had with MGS2's gameplay is that if you get caught, fighting your way out is literally never an option. Never. Enemies will respawn indefinitely. No matter how many of them you kill, you can sit in a room with an M4 and gun down like 70 guards, and it doesn't matter. They'll kill you, you'll lose, game over, restart. There was one area of the game where I got caught on this really shitty place, and there was basically just no way for me to reasonably avoid detection or go back, and I was effectively doomed to game over because the game would send an unlimited supply of Cypher drones at me. I'd blow one up, the alert would start going away, and then another one would show up, and if I killed that one, it would set off the alert again. There's nothing I can do here. I can't go back because the floor has fallen out from under me, and there are enemies in all of these windows, so I'm just screwed. There were some points in the game where it was just confusing as to what the game expected me to do if I got caught. Like the one section where you need to escort Emma Emmerich. She's only going to move if you hold her hand, and if you get detected, an unlimited amount of enemies are going to start showing up to kill you. You can't move Emma and shoot at the same time, and if you try to move Emma, you go slow as ass. Not only that, but the enemies shoot Emma if you just leave her there. So you get stuck in this endless loop where it feels like the only option is to game over. As for actually evading detection, this was also a bit weird sometimes. That's because I often found that if I just left an area and stood in the doorway right before you'd go out to get in between the struts of the big shell, you could just stand there, nothing would ever show up, and it was basically a 100% foolproof way to always get away. Which, in contrast to trying to avoid the enemies inside of the room you were just at, well, to put it simply, if they have any inkling of an idea of what room you're in, they're gonna search and check the entire room, including all the hiding places, and you're gonna get caught. I appreciate that they made the AI intelligent enough to check all of the spots you're gonna hide, but did they have to make them check all of the spots? What's the point of having hiding spots if they're just gonna check them all? It makes me question why I would ever try to hide in the level itself if I can just walk out of a door and then wait out there. Even if the enemies are hot on my ass, I just walk out of a door and they've been cheesed completely. And speaking on unwinnable scenarios, we can once again talk about the whole platforming situation. MGS2 knew it wasn't a platformer, and because of that, platforming is used sparingly. That being said, the vast majority of my game overs in this game were due to platforming or instant death KOs. There are a lot of instant fail states in the game. Now, I do have to give credit where credit's due. Because of all these instant fail states, the checkpoints in the game were very, very good. I don't know how good they are outside of these instant fail state areas because, well, I literally only died in combat one singular time, and I only died on a boss one singular time. And dying on that boss, which was Vamp, only happened because I screwed up on the controls and fell into an insta-kill. Again, insta-kills. Outside of all those issues though, the general consensus when it comes to Metal Gear Solid 2's gameplay is that it's solid, pun intended. It's genuinely enjoyable to traverse the interesting combat puzzles that are all present in the different struts of the big shell. And there was never a point in the game where I directly struggled with what I was trying to do, and when there were a few times where I didn't have any direction or wasn't entirely sure what to do, I just called around on the codec until I found the right person to tell me where something was. It's greatly appreciated when the game says, go find an AKS-74U. I have no idea where to find one, and I call all of my contacts and one of them tells me where I can find one. Overall, while I did end up enjoying the gameplay of MGS2, it did have a lot of problems, and I think some of those things took away from the general experience, although they might not have if I actually got a chance to play more of the game. Which segues us into talking about the story of the game. Now, as I already made abundantly clear, this is a story-focused game, and because of that, the gameplay is sort of on the back burner. So then, is the story of MGS2 any good? Yes, absolutely. The story of Metal Gear Solid 2 is so incredibly ahead of its time that it's hard to believe that the game was made and released in 2001. Seriously, the idea of someone having such a good understanding of the digital age and being able to easily prophesize what's going to be happening in today's age is incredible, and I don't know how the hell Hideo Kojima did it. Was it a pure stroke of luck or a pure stroke of genius? I'm not sure we'll ever know. That being said, this story about the digital age is really good, but it's so good that I feel like I just can't reasonably spoil it in this review. I've been trying my best to avoid spoilers, and I'm going to continue to try to do so, because some of the reveals here, if you don't already know them, are mind-boggling. The overarching social commentary here is just mind-blowing that it applies to today's world and was written back then. You're just gonna have to take my word for it, because if I talked about it at any such length, I'm going to ruin a lot of the game, and I want people to play the games for themselves and not have them get ruined by me. Our final area to talk about is, of course, the music. I love talking about music in games, and Metal Gear Solid 2 is no exception. As with most of the Metal Gear series, the music in this one absolutely slaps. Seriously, it's so good, and hopefully none of this stuff gets claimed. At the end of the day, Metal Gear Solid 2 is one of those games that absolutely shows its age. Even with the help of mouse and keyboard support in order to make the game play a little bit better, and the introduction of stuff like the online manual, so you don't need a physical manual in your possession in order to understand the controls, there's still a lot of just sort of archaic design decisions here that take away from the overall experience. All things considered though, the fact that the game is more of a movie and less of a game actually works to its advantage, I think, at the end of the day. As the times go on and the gameplay gets more and more outdated, it's more and more important that the overall story of the game is more of a focus. And while I do think that the pacing of the story is pretty rough, especially at the beginning, by the end, it all makes up for it. I'll stop beating around the bush though. The final score for Metal Gear Solid 2 is a 7 out of 10. Even to this day, it is an above average game. I can't reasonably give it an any higher score because I feel like it's not enough of a game to earn that, and the game that is there also can't earn that. But usually when I finish playing some of these old games, I really see no reason that I would ever come back to them, as a lot of the games from the future series entries way eclipse it and are just better in every way. But the thing is, the old classic top-down Metal Gears, looking at Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2, both of which I've now played, are such radically different experiences from the future entries in the series that I can actually see why you would want to come back and play these. They haven't been made obsolete by these future games, and the stories in them are so good that they're also not obsolete in that way. It's one of the few times that I think one of these old games actually holds up and isn't just a whole bunch of people being blinded by nostalgia. If you're watching my channel, you're probably relatively young, at least when being compared to how old this game is. There's probably a good chance that this game is older than you are. I mean, hell, I'm only older than this game by a year. And because of that, there's probably a lot of you out there who haven't given this game a try. So while I haven't and still need to get around to playing Metal Gear Solid 3, which I know is regarded as one of the best in the series, I think I can already comfortably say that MGS 1 and 2 alone are worth the purchase price of the Metal Gear Solid Classic Collection on Steam or consoles, and if you have the capabilities of playing these games, you really should do so. With that though, I am wrapping up today's video. I know I'm sort of committing algorithm suicide by uploading this video, but sometimes I just play something that I want to talk about and I'm passionate about, and that's this video. If you enjoyed the video, you can of course leave a like and subscribe, it helps me out. If you didn't, don't, and with all that being said, have a wonderful day and night wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time.